There was lots of rumours, lots of talk going around of what potentially could happen. The guys remained, incredibly motivated, and it was a great feeling to be part of a team that had this potential goal that we were working towards.
And then we set about, I suppose, getting ready for deployment to Telly with the appropriate environment of freezing snow.
Yeah, our training for the temperatures of Iraq was sort of tipping around in minus temperatures over in Bergen-Hohner and Senderlager.
And then, I distinctly remember January in that cookhouse, David Patterson getting the whole battalion in and all the attached arms and so on into that temporary cookhouse and standing on his chair. And I mean, he was a tall enough bloke anyway, wasn't he? But standing on the chair and words along the lines of, "We're going," and just the roar, the cheer.
It was, we're going to go. We're deploying to Kuwait. We know what we've got to do. We're in a very good position to do it. We're well trained, well manned, well led. I think it'll be good.
It was 0 to 60 in seconds. Literally from the moment of being told that we would be deploying when we were in Senderlager through to actually arriving out in Kuwait, seemed to fly by so quickly.
We'd have in January, it was in January, we got the opportunity to meet the CO and some of the officers and NCOs from the US Marine Corps that would be supporting us as well. And I think when they turned up in camp, having flown from California to meet with us, that's when everybody went, "Oh, this shit's real."
The scale of it was pretty breathtaking, sort of landing in Kuwait, being processed through, and then just sort of being driven north into the desert, sort of taking a ride off the main highway, and then just being dropped into this camp, which basically stretched as far as the eye could see.
I felt like a 7th Brigade soldier, almost more than I felt like a Fusilier. When you've got the entirety of all that combat power around you, I'm starting to realise how much force we could bring to bear.
As I've been told, the heaviest battle group that the UK Army had put together since World War II.
You've got a full vehicle's worth of ammunition. You're ready to use racks in the turret. Turrets are all fully stocked. Your wine racks are fully stocked. Your platoon sergeant's there with his mortars, 51 mortars and things, and that's when it really did hit home that that this was, things were getting very real at this point.
We rehearsed and we rehearsed out there, and I remember we did a full battle group rehearsal on how to cross the berm and actually break out into Iraq, and that was like a 72 hour rehearsal.
Udari Ranges, the final integration, doing live fire with close air support, and our culminating event, basically doing an advanced contact with live close air support, dropping 1,000-pound munitions onto the objective before we roll over the objective. Phenomenal. In any circumstances, phenomenal. We did that in nearly zero conditions, because at that stage when we went through, we got a big sandstorm blew through, and we just went through the whole procedure as if it was for real.
Of course, in the middle of that, you then got to take your NAPS tablets, you then got to do your inspections, you've got to take your water inspections. We just did everything, and I don't think we could have been more ready.
But then we started to see things like the Fox vehicle, which was the CBRN identifier. It turned up to our front. The fact that somebody had thought it important enough to put a very limited resource just in front of us was, first of all, reassuring, but then a bit worrying, because if it's that close to us, we're not really going to have very much time if we do get attacked.
When you are putting on an NBC suit for real, that shape, you know, you kind of think, all right, this, I'll make sure my seals are done properly.
And then when we had that brief from the Marine Corps General, and you had an overflight of all sorts of aircraft, it kind of started to sink home that this was it's bigger than just a Fusiliers.
Picking up bits and pieces on the news about what was happening in the UN Security Council and various bits and pieces. So you definitely felt like you were at the centre of world events at the time, which was a pretty exhilarating time.
On Tuesday night, I gave the order for British forces to take part in military action in Iraq. Tonight, British servicemen and women are engaged from air, land and sea. Their mission? To remove Saddam Hussein from power and disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction.
We were in the command post, in the brigade command post, and Graham Binns got a telephone call and went outside. Then he called Doug Gibson and I outside and said, you know, how quickly can you be prepared to move? And it became apparent that there was some talk of a threat of the Medina Division, which was I think it was the 51st Division was the original one that was supposedly holding the border area. It had been assumed that they'd wrapped and gone home, but the Medina Division was a Republican Guard division, which was allegedly moving south down towards the border area to oppose the crossings. It became very apparent that we had to move very quickly in order to get the crossings in and get a bridgehead force in order to be able to secure the crossings.
The first thing I remember about H-Hour moving by 24 hours. So this is H-Hour for not just Zulu company, but for an entire brigade, was literally being in the cookhouse, which was a tent set up at the back of the company lines. And being somebody running in saying, the OCs need to get back to your vehicles really rapidly.
We all went up and then spent, I think, 36 hours ahead of you guys coming up, just mapping it out, laying out lanes, getting the tack markers in, rehearsing, because of course we knew, it wasn't like 4 hours and everyone was in. This was going to take 24 hours to get everyone in and where the packets were coming and rehearsing the order in which they're coming. It's unglamorous, but if we'd got it wrong, we would have got off on the wrong foot, and it needed to be right.
And that night, instead of doing what was going to be a silent, benign crossing, we did a very noisy assault crossing of the berm over two crossings, Triangle 1 and Triangle 2. We fired a 32-gun fire mission from 3RHA, who'd been reinforced with 16 guns from 12 Regiment, I think. So we fired a very noisy fire plan in support of the crossing, and the crossings went in just before, sort of during the night, just before first light. And then that was us with our foothold in Iraq.
I can then remember H-Hour, because I think, like a lot of us can, you can just remember the sound of the artillery and the weight and the impact. You could just feel it, even in your turrets.
Yeah. No one told us the freaking mortars were going to fire in the assembly area, so we were all waiting to launch. And the mortar line was literally just behind us. And when they started firing, I think the entire company had to change its trousers. That was the first time we thought we were under fire.
It was basically a large, sort of man-made hill running east. It would have been east to west, I think. And it felt like it was pretty high, 10 meters or so. Obviously man-made. We got dismounted troops, got to the top of that to provide a bit of overwatch. Fire missions were coming in. They felt like they were pretty close at the time.
Here we were lined up in a big long line on this sandbank, looking for targets, looking for enemy movement. There was stuff in the far distance.
Engineers put the breach in, then we were across that, and then I think it was the tanks that we had with us sort of provided the breakout force, and we're into Iraq.
We did the little breakout, and so we my platoon were deployed sort of forward right of the company. I think 7 platoon was forward left, which was normally how we did. And as we broke through into Iraq, we sort of secured that bridgehead, and actually we ended up staying there for quite a long time. So
once we were launched out of the bridgehead, Route Tampa, which was the main road up to towards Azibaya and Basra, was opened up to us, and 7th Brigade sort of roared up there on that first morning, strangely enough, led by the reconnaissance parties, the traditional R group, because it was going up to make contact for a relief in place, effectively, with the Marines up around the edge of Basra.
But sort of driving up the highway was a pretty surreal experience. Sort of 2 or 3 lane highway, and sort of signposts off to Basra, and that was surreal. And then just seeing the detritus that I guess the Americans had left behind them when they sort of conducted their sort of air support, and smoking APC hulks all over the place, and burnt out tanks.
And as it happened, of course, they were still heavily in contact when we got there, and they had not succeeded in achieving the objectives that they expected to do.
And when we got to the link-up, which was just north of Azibaya, it became very clear that E Company 2nd Tanks, who were the US Marine Corps company that I was just supposed to do a handover with, actually it was going to be relief in combat, because they were engaged with the enemy. They hadn't achieved their objectives that they had been given, and that they'd withdrawn under heavy fire, which had resulted in vehicle casualties for them, and that we would just need to basically move forwards, do a very rapid handover.
I went up first with the recce group, and we took over. We linked up with the Marine company that we were taking over from, got the lay of the land, but they were sat well back. We were on the motorway bridge, which is about 2 k's short of the bridge itself, of the crossing of the Shat. So we were sitting back about 2 k's. That's as far as the Marines had got, for very understandable reasons. They just didn't want to get embroiled, because they had to get up north. So I got the lay of the land. The 2IC, Liam Wilson, brought the rest of the company up, and we just took over their positions.
when you see an American tank that's destroyed, you think, oh, this is real now.
Basra Airport had a massive chain link fence all the way around the outside. The American Marines had got there and kind of secured the outside, but hadn't gone in to clear the buildings or nothing like that.
When we moved into the airport, there was evidence that the Iraqis had been using the airport as some sort of control node, and we moved there at last light. So Paul Nansen gave direction, don't go into the airport at night. We don't need to do it. It will make it much more complicated. And as the sunrise sort of came along, we got ready and did a clearance of on one side the main Basra airport, and then there was sort of a hotel complex, I think it was, where I think they'd set up a sort of command post.
So we gave orders once the main bodies were coming up to do basically quick attacks to secure all of those. So it was Third Company Group in the south were to clear Bridge 4, Dickey Trance, C Squadron, Bridge 3, Bridge 2 by the International Airport was Y Company, and then B Squadron under Giles Harrison was swinging around to the north to what we thought was Bridge 1, but it was just basically a sort of very minor crossing. It never actually turned out to be a proper bridge.
objective goal for Bridge 4 had been identified by the brigade commander as his key terrain, because it was the relief valve which will allow any civilians to move out of Basra as we enforce a ring of steel around Basra. The Iraqis had set up a defensive position on the bridge. They'd taken what was the Basra City bus station, which was on our home bank, and they turned that into a little bit of a strong point, and they had some defensive position. And then on their home bank, which was our beach, on our beachhead or bridgehead side, far distant from us, they'd set up a impromptu in some respects, but very well dug in defensive position.
And the LC at the time, Duncan McSporran, he got the platoon sergeants, warrior commanders and above, like a body set of orders, and it's case of right, this is it. So in the early hours we're going to run into the bridges.
Through Chris Risquet's platoon to clear the strong point.
We were 2 vehicles up, 2 behind, and then we had the SF guys behind us in their white pickup, and that was it. Sort of off we went. Sergeant Wellard had fire support going down at an enemy position away over the riverbank, and then I had an O group with my section commanders, literally just rolling the sections through, and I still remember it in my head. So we went almost in an L shape, so it went through the big warehouse as it was first, with the bays that you sort of service bays in, just rolled the sections through as it were in a dogleg, clearing the compound as we went. And I think it must have taken about 90 minutes. It was getting dark, but it dare I say it, the training took over. You know, it was literally PCD, Sandesk. What do? You just get your sections and you launch them, you just let them go. And I was so fortunate, you know.
Whilst we were doing that, supported by our tanks, supported by the mortar section that we had within the company group, one of the tank crews identified that the Iraqis were trying to initiate a reserve demolition on the bridge. The reality was that the only way to stop the brigade commander's key terrain from potentially being destroyed by a reserve demolition was to actually to assault across the bridge. Chris Head and his platoon, with company headquarters and a limited number of assets that we were allowed to take across, we basically assaulted across the bridge into the defensive position, supported by everything on the home bank. The fire plan that we had to support that assault was cancelled, and we went in with direct fire weapons, and that included our own mortars. Our own mortars were told to stop firing, and we were only able to assault with direct fire systems. The tanks, in particular, their direct fire support with the 120mm was incredibly effective at suppressing the enemy and allowing us to get onto the position and then clear those out with the dismounts. One of our sapper section commander, our mounted sapper section commander, basically defused a 2.5-ton reserve demolition whilst we were under attack. The Iraqi engineer party was killed in the act of trying to detonate that reserve demolition.
So on the run into the bridge, he stopped us short. We then debussed, and then it was Ben Healy, Cut Healy, front left-hand section, and then front right-hand section, Richard Burbridge. They then dismounted. We had a fight for probably about 2 hours on the bridge at that point, conscious at the same time that we was fighting over to our right-hand side Zulu company. So the rest of Zulu company was also fighting on their bridges.
We knew the first thing to do was to try and get eyes on what was going on the bridge, and because we'd had reports of preparing it for demolitions, and we'd had reports that half of it had gone and all this sort of thing. So I had a troop from the Queen's Royal Lancers of tanks with me, Rowley, and I told Rowley to sort of try and get as far forward as he could and see what was going on. So he took his troop up, and they spent the night really sniping across the river, picking off what he could on the far side.
Throughout that night, so Rowley was coming across the net with his contact reports. So one times BMP engaged and destroyed, and on times. T55 engaged.
Half the bridge was still intact, so there's two crossings over it, motorway bridge. So the one of the three lanes had gone, been destroyed. One was still intact. Didn't know whether it was still prepared for demolition or not. Couldn't take the risk that it wasn't. And so got orders. The CO said, right, to do a dawn attack to seize the bridge and then hold it. We had 2 platoons, and so the plan was to keep 8 platoon back, use 7 platoon as the assault force with the company jets, and we would go forward and try and get Ollie's platoon across the bridge to secure it with the sappers to check for DEMs. Couldn't take the warriors across or the tanks because of the threat, so there was going to be a dismounted attack.
Yeah, and then I dismounted from the warrior, and it was pretty clear that we're in contact almost straight away, and sort of that dawning realization that there are people shooting at me, and they mean us no good, and that was sort of pretty sobering again. As we're going across the bridge, the sort of small arms intensified a bit, and then I think we had a couple of indirect fire at us as well. It was a Fusilier car who got sort of knocked off his feet by a mortar explosion. So yeah, we got across to the far side of the bridge, still dismounted. And I think my sort of enduring memory of that is I had Corporal Burden, Sally Burden, my radio operator, was next to me. Obviously he's connected to me because I've got the handset, and he can only go so far. And I was sort of kneeling up to see what we could see and send a sit rep back to Paul Nansen. And I felt this sort of really insistent tug on my sleeve. I was like, Sally, not now, I'm busy. And then it sort of gradually more and more insistent, and then they sort of, Sally, what do you want? He said, do you mind if we get into a bit of cover?
Boys did amazing stuff, and that's where Ollie won his military cross.
It was sort of pretty classic infantry dig in, sort of take the indirect fire that was coming our way, and do our best to try and spot where it was coming from, and keep alert for anyone who was trying to get close enough to attack. Probably another kilometre or so beyond us was pretty flat, open sort of scrubland, and then the sort of outskirts of Basra started. But those outskirts were a couple of sort of buildings, low level buildings, before it sort of started getting into Basra proper. And that's when I remember the Cobras came in, the US helicopters, 2 or 4 of them. And they did a pretty good job of working over that sort of front edge of the buildings.
The C Squadron casualties in a friendly fire instance is always really difficult to deal with, and is always you just sort of think why, but war is a really difficult business, and people make decisions in the snap of the moment, but probably sometimes they end up regretting for the rest of their lives. Losing Corporal Albert and Trooper Clark on that early morning, one of the sort of first days in the operations around the bridge, was an absolute tragedy, and completely, actually, even with the view of 2020 hindsight, completely unnecessary. And I remember going down to C Squadron, straight away afterwards, having been woken up and told that it had happened, and went down there. And we spoke to, I spoke to Dickie, Dickie Trant, who was a squadron leader. And they definitely felt very aggrieved about it. They knew exactly what had happened and how it had happened, I think, by that stage, and they knew it hadn't been an Iraqi tank that had taken out the Corporal Albert's vehicle, and So we basically got the squadron together. Dickie and I got the squadron together, and we talked to them, and we said, look, the best legacy that we can give these two young lads is that we can get on and do what they started to do. We just need to rally around now, look to each other, talk to each other, and move on. And great testament to Dickie's leadership and the squadron sergeant major, actually, that they did exactly that.
The Iraqi army had not dissolved at that stage. That was the kind of nature of it. And they were very determined and very driven by whatever means to take the bridge back.
Yeah, there was bodies, there were ditches, it was quite marshy, which again we weren't expecting. It had been snowed in the desert, and that caught us by surprise. And there was some torrential rain, absolutely howling rain, once we got into the position. So although the engineers had come up and dug us fighting positions for the vehicles, we had to dig our own shell scrapes in support of the vehicles, and the clag in the mud was absolutely horrific.
We started sending out, fighting patrols at night, recce and fighting patrols at night, to find out what was going on.
We'd be getting lots of indirect fire onto our positions on Bridge 2, and it was B Squadron that was holding Bridge 2 at the time. They were getting lots of mortars and rocket. I don't know what they were using, but it was, and we knew where it was coming from, and we knew. It was telling us that there were 2 or 3 teams that we just couldn't get with indirect fire because it was in a built-up area. So the decision was taken to go and do a strike or a fighting patrol to go and try and find these people, and if possible, bring someone back. And we set out. Obviously, after last night, we got dropped off short of the bridge, and then went across the bridge and tabbed out. I think it was about 2 miles.
We set out on what effectively was a company minus fighting patrol, led by myself and my team. One of the most nerve-wracking orienteering courses I've ever done. It was so simple. I've made it simple in my plan, but every 10 metres I was checking my compass just to make sure we were still on the right track. Absolute pitch darkness.
The plan was going to be that we'd put a bit of cordon around the house, put the MSS in depth to provide cut-off, and then a section, called Hayden's section, was going to go in and do the lift of these guys. We
dropped off the overwatch, and then I led the platoon round to our line of departure, and I felt pretty exposed at that point. With a sort of line of buildings and housing facing us, and then I launched.
Sent platoon across the lane, silent section fire manoeuvre up to a point. I could observe all this through my CWS, and a guy called Drew Hayton, who was the section commander, then silently went into the enemy position.
In the best spirit of mission command, Corporal Hayton had just used initiative and got on with it. And I think we'd gone to the wrong house, but he quickly reorientated himself and eventually went in, very brave man, and lifted these guys. And eventually, I think we got 1 prisoner. The rest made a run for it and were taken out by the manoeuvre support by Ed Rutherford's boys at the back.
And as he broke back out of there, the engagement started, and we the MSS started the suppression of the enemy position as 2nd Platoon did a fighting withdrawal by sections.
Everything just kicked off and bedlam, chaos, whatever they call it. As we pulled out of the objective, the coppers came in and were covering our extraction. So you had these gunships doing their thing behind us. It was incredible.
I don't smoke, but I had a cigarette in the back of the Warrior on the way back, and that felt pretty good.
at the time, in my mind, we didn't know that it was a warehouse and distribution area. We just knew, or from the orders that I'd received at the time, is ISR had identified trucks coming in and out of this compound on a daily basis, and we thought potentially that could have been an ammunition distribution point or whatnot, and we then had to go in and clear this area.
Colonel David would say, right, I want a raid. So you're going to go in, you're going to sort out what's happening in there, take some assets with you and have a look at that, and then you're going to be come out. So it's really clearly defined. It's a raid, not sitting there. And I said to him, so Colonel, you're telling me that I'm going back in, I'm going in there, and I'm coming back out, and I'm not going to be required to stay in breadbasket, in the facility. And he said, yeah, absolutely, I'll be straight back out. So 7 days later, I was still there.
Breadbasket, obviously big, massive warehouse complex, but around it was just literally marshlands, so you couldn't get the vehicles in or around it. It was literally like little hillocks with then water around them.
We did a dismounted patrol, company-sized patrol, across the sort of no man's line, the Sabka and so on.
We got out and dismounted as a platoon about 1.25 miles away, knowing that we had a H-hour to hit, and we was already not going to hit that H-hour because we weren't as close as what we thought we was. So you've now got a platoon worth of 27, 28 men, fully loaded with operational fighting equipment, with all their radars, with all their batteries, having to do, in essence, a Brecon 2-miler at pace with all their kit to get there and then fight at the end of it.
We breached through one of the holes in the walls at the breadbasket, and we cleared from south to north, and then occupied it for a period.
And that just the size of it was just phenomenal. So we got given, I don't know how many, maybe 12 or so warehouses to clear, and it was just systematic clearance.
It's a distribution plant for the whole of the city. Everything from socks and underwear through to light bulbs and main generators. It had everything in here. But you had to go and make sure that every one of these areas was clear before you moved on to the next one. And of course you then can't leave what you've just cleared. You have to have someone occupy it to make sure that no one then can come and re-infiltrate. So it's extremely manpower intensive. It's tiring to go and do it properly. And when you've only got a company in which to do it, you then have to sometimes extend yourself a little bit more than what you'd want to do to make sure you've got someone in each of those stages in place.
And later, once we'd been in and secured, the Sergeant Major had the unenvious task of bringing the vehicles in, and they got into a lot of contact, a lot of RPG fire, trying to get the vehicles in round the front through the road.
We called it dipping the toe into the waters, and we would send an armoured column into Basra.
We went out to go and do VCPs into the city as close support for the tankies. Dickie Trant, the word stick with me now when we were going off to do some VCPs was be mustard, and at the time I was thinking that was the most cavalier thing I've ever heard, but actually thinking back at it now, what a great thing to say before you're going into the unknown. So we were in our Warriors. Tanks were crashing into the city, and they were taking RPG fire. T-55 to our front, probably about a K away, seeing the turret traverse towards us. So then trying to fire off rounds. I didn't know at the time, but my recuperator was broken. So got one round off, couldn't fire anymore. So then trying to brief the lads in the back to get them out of the vehicle. Flapping's the wrong word, but sweating a little bit. But then fortunately, Zero Bravo, the OC had seen what was going on and fortunately steamed in past us and fired and destroyed the T-55. So that was that's why in my diary I've got it down as op certain death. And there's that sort of love again for the rumble of the Charlie 2, a special place in my heart for sort of that moment.
The Scots DG had been raiding from Bridge 4 north that night, and had got stuck into the university area in the south of the city, and were having a fairly good fight down there. The Black Watch also launched and had got themselves pretty much into the centre of town, and I think the brigade commander, had reached the conclusion that actually it was good to go, and so he launched us into the north of the city, and we swung down round to marry up with the Black Watch. I knew when we were going to give orders what our sort of attack axes were going to be, the fact that we would probably split the battle group into two sort of fighting wedges, as it were, in order to achieve that mission.
This is a city with a population, and by then we knew the enemy had sort of melted away. Well, the conventional enemy had melted away, and we were now facing a sort of militia that was sort of hiding amongst the population and probably were going to snipe at us. We had very clear objectives. I knew where I was going, I knew where Duncan was going, and we were, I know my objective was going to be the power station, and then I had to get the hotel, the Shuttle Arab Hotel. Those were my two objectives. And the objective was to keep the boys mounted, not get out unless you absolutely had to, because we thought we were probably safer in our vehicles. So that was the plan, and we had the tanks up front as usual, forcing routes through.
When it comes to doing your job and doing your job well, you realise how important, what an effect a tank can have, and likewise, and I think they realise what we as armoured infanteers bring to the battle groups.
So the very first task my platoon was given was right on the edge of Basra, as we was about to move into it, was to do a clearance patrol of the first portion of a sector of the city. And right at the far side of this was a school which we'd identified. So we'd done the initial clearance in it and then went straight into the school. And then, funny enough, right smack bang in the middle of the school playground was an anti-aircraft platform. All the ammunition was still there, all live. The thing was a working, fully operational piece of kit.
We moved into the university to clear what was very much a well-prepared defence from the Iraqi position, but it was very clear at that point that whilst it was a defended position, that the Iraqis had lost the will to fight.
It's the first time that I'd come across in civilians fighting aged males. So as we cleared through the town, bear in mind we've now got our warriors on the outskirts, but it's the dismounts that are in the town doing it. On the top of every building, pretty much so, there were males just observing us. And then when we got to the school and we found the aircraft piece, that's when they came off the rooftop. They didn't surround the school, but there was probably about 60 or 70 fighting aged males in civvies watching our every move when we got there, and that was quite unnerving.
There were times where they had to dismount and they had to fight through, and obviously in the academy, as it was called, it was the old Naval Academy. They had quite a fight. It was 9 platoon had quite a fight, and that's where we lost young Torrington.
One of my warrior commanders, thought they were in contact, deployed their section to go and clear an enemy position, sort of that was in depth. So there was a little culvert with a stream running through, and sort of reported contact, and unfortunately during that bit of the operation, Keelan Torrington was shot and killed. At the time, we didn't know that he had died, and so we had, you had almost no option but to get on with the job, and actually the platoon was amazing at just keep on going, because they all understood we had a job to do, and so Paul got in touch with me at the end of the day and told me that Keenan unfortunately died of the wounds he sustained. You know, Keenan was a really great guy in the platoon, and I like I said, it's easy to sort of, you know, you hear it for everyone, but he was genuinely a brilliant soldier, real loss for us. But the ability of the platoon, it's not down to me, it's down to the platoon, you know, the Fusiliers in the platoon, the section commanders, the 2 ICs, just to come together, talk about it in a way that I think helped, you know, but I thought it was really testament to the strength of that, you know, everyone in that platoon.
Yes, that was another uneasy night, really, that first night, until the next morning when we could begin to shake out and start to dominate what we had just taken.
Well, the second day we did another advance contact into the middle of town. I mean, we ended up in El Makil by the port, and the idea was that White Company are going to sort of loop round and head into the middle of town and try and secure the docks. So we did that advance, and I think the Paras were there as well. Fleet Para had been brought in as well, and they were alongside. Anyway, we eventually ended up in Al Makil, and we got ourselves into a place we then called Apache, which was a patrol base. Basically, we formed it out of an old maritime base.
The Iraqi children stick in my mind. They were very, very pleased to see us, in my view. What would become later known as fighting age males, kind of teenagers, mid-20s, took us with suspicion, and the old people just didn't seem to care either way. But yeah, it was quite surreal having less than a week ago, or a week before, having conducted that fighting patrol, to now be moving in amongst the population of the city that would be shelling, bombing, lobbing, H-ing into for a while.